Hello, I'm a Spanish native who has been learning English for more than 3 years, Japanese for 14 months, and I'm a calisthenics athlete. These two hobbies are why I want to introduce discipline to language learning. I've distilled the lessons of more than 100 videos in my channel and put them into this one bit. There are more than 3,000 hours between my English and Japanese, and this video is not only about language learning, but also things you could find that distract you from learning the language that you want. Being capable of tolerating ambiguity is nothing special and is a skill that 99% of people have totally the potential to develop. The thing that happens is that in today's society, we're getting too used to the very short type of content presented in social media like YouTube or TikTok, and that in most cases is not even educational. And you probably don't know this, but the things we eat do have an effect on how much we can tolerate ambiguity. So for example, if you are accustomed to eating ice creams, chocolates, sugary food in general on a daily basis, it's super normal that you struggle with concentration because you're having spikes of dopamine every day which are really fun instantly, and when you get to do something more boring like immersion in wearable language and you have less than a 50% of comprehension, of course you will struggle with focus. And that is not even counting the effects that junk food have on your brain, which they exist, and one of the common ones is brain fog. And there's a lot of people who think that they have ADHD, but in reality they just eat like bullshit and they watch TikTok for 4 hours daily. So of course you have brain fog and a very short attention span. The things I do to get better at tolerating ambiguity is multitasking less on a daily basis. A lot of times we watch videos when we eat or we listen to music when we take a bath, so I stopped doing that. Not watching any social media like TikTok, Instagram and Facebook. The only one I use is YouTube because I have to upload these videos, and sometimes I watch podcasts which are 30 minutes to 1 hour long, so it's not going to get my attention span worse, right? If anything, it will probably make it better. Third and probably most important is meditating. I managed to meditate for 10 to 20 minutes daily, and if you're interested in doing it, you can use this app called Medito, which is free. The amount I usually study daily is 14 hours every day with 100 reviews for every deck. I have been capable of maintaining this amount for more than 5 months, so you can check my stats of the 2 decks I have right now here. I need to know that there's discussions about Anki with its usefulness. I personally think that you should use it if you're learning languages the hardcore way, like 7 to 8 hours daily, because there's almost nothing in language learning that is going to give you a better return on your time than Anki. Not because you're going to precisely memorize 40 words a day, but because it gives you the chance of being able to easily notice those 40 new words you studied that day during your immersion. And the way I will suggest you study words on Anki, which is the way I do it, is to not try and be perfect and memorize all of the meanings in just one word. Just memorize like 1 or 2. I say not to memorize everything in perfection because there's actually a very high chance that you're not going to find or see that word in your immersion that day if it's not that common. So why should you spend your time with something that is going to hardly give you any results? Let's even say that you memorize it till the perfection. Still, if you find that word in your immersion, you're probably not going to get the meaning of it either way, and you will have to review it again. If it has a lot of meanings, of course. I study Anki this way because you don't want to be spending more than 1 hour on Anki, for the reason that everything after 1 hour is just diminishing results, so it's not really worth it. If you can maintain the same amount of new words per day with 30 to 40 minutes in your Anki sessions, which is the time it often takes me, you'll notice a very rapid growth in your vocabulary. How do I manage not to burn out when I study more than 5 hours daily, and even some days I'm studying 8 hours? It's not actually that difficult. Like, if almost the only thing that you do in your day is learning a language and you don't have any bad habits like going to parties, eating out, hanging out with your friends, all of the things that could limit your potential, eventually you're just bored and you don't have anything to do. So at least let's do something productive like immersion or recording a video, which are the things that maybe are really boring at the moment, but in a long time horizon usually end up being more fulfilling. So of course, something that you think is entertaining or at least maybe even kind of fun for you is not really going to get you bored out as well. This happens a lot with immersion, which some shows you can watch them for like 12 hours daily. There's also another type of person that gets bored out, which is the person that does not know what their capabilities are. If you try to do 5 hours of immersions daily since the start of learning whatever language, you probably will think that it's not maintainable and that I'm just bullshitting you. However, even I wasn't capable of doing 2 hours of immersion since the start, so why would you try and do more than that? The thing I did to get this amount was to increase progressively the amount of immersion I did daily. If I did 2 hours yesterday, then at the end of the week, I want to do 2 hours and 30 minutes. Maybe something that you don't realize also is that it gets easier with time because you start understanding more and you get good at the skill of being bored. So remember that everything compounds and the harder days are usually just when you are starting. There's this term that almost all language learner YouTubers say, which is quality immersion. And what the fuck is quality immersion? I'm gonna give my best concept for what quality immersion is, the ability of being able to pay attention to my immersion without getting distracted. That's literally quality immersion in just one phrase. You probably could imagine what a person who does not get the results that they want in language learning looks like even when they are doing 3 to 4 hours of immersion daily. Yes, they have the notifications of their phone turned on even when they are doing immersion, working or studying. When they get a message from their friend saying, "Do you want to play Rocket League right now?" they say, "Of course," and end up forgetting to do immersion as well. I could even imagine people answering messages in WhatsApp while they do immersion, eating ice cream, eating even a normal food, which relates to last point. If your body enters in digestive mode, which is a mode in which you are kind of sleepy, you don't want to do much things, you start getting some brain fog depending on what you eat. Either way, your ability to pay attention to your immersion will be super reduced. And so my tip for you in this section is to imagine the actions that the version of you who has a lot of quality immersion do and imitate that. He wakes up early to the immersion, he does immersion whilst he's fasted, you get the point. I think it's really useful to have an idea on how your conscious and subconscious knowledge works, especially for language learning, since you will have a much more clear idea about what you need to do next in order to improve our language learning. As for conscious knowledge, this is the one we know right now is in our minds and it gets inserted through external repetitive actions we do throughout our day. You can imagine that it will probably be much easier to see Japanese and whatever thing if you have thoughts about that thing in specific whenever your mind gets distracted. And you can actually implant thoughts in your brain through actions we consider important and doing those actions in an important time period during the day. For example, my brain is not going to consider important something that I do for just 30 minutes at 4 p.m. after I came from school. My brain does consider important what my actions are when I wake up, and that's why I have that thought first thing on the morning. If you always scroll on social media for 20 minutes before you go out of bed in the morning, now your brain will automatically think about doing that habit whenever you wake up. If you want to always have thoughts about language learning first thing on the morning, you need to first go through the period of struggling to remember that thing whenever you wake up and actually doing it, so your brain starts considering that action important, until it becomes automatic to have that thought first thing in the morning. How does the subconscious play into this? Subconscious is all the information we have in our minds that is not processed to the consciousness to just make our lives simpler. A clear example could be that if you're at a coffee shop, you're just there to be relaxed drinking your coffee most of the times, and so you don't really pay attention to other people's conversation, but you are actually hearing them. It's just that all that information goes into your subconscious, because if that information actually does go into your consciousness, you will get crazy in a matter of minutes. That's why people with too much awareness of their surroundings, which is a result of trauma, are really self-conscious or have social anxiety. Now, if you can imagine your consciousness as this empty bar, and whenever you do an external action, that will be a ball that starts bouncing inside of that empty bar. When you put a lot of external actions inside of that conscious bar, which in this case, let's hope that they are thoughts about language learning, usually the most prominent ones start bouncing a lot, and that's when they break the consciousness and enter the second bar, which is the subconsciousness. If you are paying attention to this, you can guess that if you do a lot of immersion that day, those are the only thoughts that you're going to be inserting into your consciousness. And so there are going to be a lot of balls bouncing in there, so much that a lot of them are going to bounce into the subconscious bar, and that's when you will be automatically thinking about language learning whenever you get distracted. Besides doing the action, you can do things like watching videos about language learning, reading books about learning, where everything you could do related to language learning is actually going to help you at having more thoughts about that thing. I know that there's people saying that if you just watch videos, you will not learn anything, and that's true. I'm not saying to only watch videos or read books about the language you're learning and not do immersion. You need to have in mind that this helps you as long as you're actually doing the thing. You could use watching videos or reading books as a break if you have already done more than 4 to 6 hours of immersion today. So watching more videos about language learning objectively is not doing immersion, we all know that, right? But if it inserts more thoughts about that thing throughout the day, it is indirectly helping you to not forget what your goal is, and it's making you obsessive about it. So I'm saying this seriously, don't watch my videos if you haven't done 4 hours of immersion already and you have the time, because right now you're just procrastinating. I think that speaking actually seems way harder than it actually is, for the reason that it is kind of scary at first if the only idea that you have about it is that you need to just speak in order to start speaking, which yeah, you have to, but there are less scary ways of starting, or let's say ways that don't require going out of your house or being social in the internet. Because I don't know if this happens to you, but at least for me, I don't really relate a lot to average people. So doing things like language exchanges with people that I don't really like doesn't seem that fun or efficient. And maybe I'm wrong, who knows? Another reason is that I don't have the money to pay for lessons on Italki or whatever of these apps. So the things I apply to start speaking in English could help you. So first I started with reading aloud whatever book or articles I found, which I don't really recommend reading articles unless you are like super interested in them, because they're really short. So pick whatever book that you like. I see a lot of people always picking versions of Harry Potter to learn languages, so if you're a fan of that, maybe you could look for the Harry Potter version of the language you're studying, and literally read for at least 1, 4, or even 5 hours a day, depending on how much tired you get, how fast you want your progress to be, or the hours you have available. So just with reading aloud alone, you will improve a lot at pronunciation if you have a good basis on listening and you can correct yourself. I say having a good basis on listening because that's literally the best way of having instant feedback. The only thing that can be compared to this is having a native giving you instant feedback, and even then, having the knowledge of when it is that you mispronounce a word and being able to self-correct it can't be compared when you do conscious self-studying. Something I didn't really do, which I would recommend a lot right now, is to record yourself talking when you're reading aloud, and you can listen to it whenever you go to the gym, in your house, take a shit, wherever. So I wouldn't really recommend to be recording for an hour, just record for like 10 minutes, because that's enough to notice whatever kind of mistakes in your speech you could have and start correcting them the next time you read. Something I don't really see a lot of people doing, because some will consider it cringe for some reason, is literally creating things like a YouTube channel or social media in which you could record your progress or teach the things you like. I feel like I took my English pronunciation way more seriously after I started speaking before people, because some were actually telling me that I need to improve on my pronunciation. It's like a feeling that you need to actually perform, because if not, people will not understand you. Even if literally no one is watching you, I would recommend doing this if you're a person who likes to add a bit of pressure to yourself. And who knows, maybe a video of yours can go viral. Overall, doing whatever social thing, let it be social media or real life, will always add pressure, which in most of the cases will make you get better faster. The last thing I want to add to this section is that I don't think that these are the best ways of learning how to speak. Literally the most efficient way of learning how to speak is literally speaking. There's no way around it. So if you can talk with natives or pay lessons, that's literally the best way. My listening and learning English was for sure one of the hardest things, for the reason that there use so much accents and words that you will think are pronounced one way, but when you realize it's the other way around. So when I talk about English pronunciation, I always remember this Spanish native called Mr. Salas, from which I learned what comprehensive input means and started learning English from. He literally says that English is a language made out of drunk people, which I really agree with. Now, when it comes to Japanese listening, it is probably the influence of having Spanish as my mother tongue, because I don't really feel like I lack anything in this area besides vocabulary. Of course, usually we all have more comprehension when we use subtitles, especially in Japanese, because the characters used in writing have a meaning. But when it comes to actually hearing what is the word they said or how they pronounce it, it is really straightforward, and that's probably why I think it's very similar to Spanish. The times I feel like I didn't really understand something and I'm doing pure listening are when I don't have enough vocabulary, and every month I notice improvement in just pure listening whenever my vocabulary improves by at least 1 keyword. So I'm pretty confident that my listening will keep improving, but just time and effort will actually end up proving it. I will say that there's not much you could do about improving your listening other than literally just doing input, like there's no more efficient method. Now, probably watching shows or YouTube videos without subtitles will be the better option if what you want to do is pure listening. But when watching shows in English, I actually never did remove the subtitles, so I don't think that you should do it too. The only times I actually did remove them was when watching Peaky Blinders, and maybe it could have restrained my listening, who knows? Probably I think so. If something, my reading was probably restrained because I feel like my listening is just better in English. So I think that if you can combine both using subtitles and not using them, that's probably the better way around it. So I would probably focus a bit more on listening on a language like English, but for Japanese I wouldn't really stop using them, never. And the only times I will practice just pure listening are when I'm working, walking, doing exercise, and just having it on the back. The reason for not really putting that much focus on Japanese listening is reading. Apart from the fact that I consider Japanese listening kind of easy, so the second most difficult part of learning Japanese is by far, and I think that we all can agree on this, reading. I say second because for sure the most difficult one is writing, so I don't think that there's any discussions on that statement, right? With that said, I'm focusing more on trying to have an overall fluency, and of course that those include reading, and so that's why I promote the idea of using subtitles always in Japanese. So I know for a fact also that for an English native speaker, it's recommended to focus more on listening first when it comes to learning Japanese and developing reading and writing after. But I watched some videos from this guy uploading his progress to YouTube called Hulu. And it's crazy to see that the thing he enjoys the most is reading, when the average person usually enjoys more listening, especially in a language like Japanese because it's just way harder to read. It's not really intuitive until you have at least 5k to 7k words in your vocabulary, and also it's just way boring than watching anime, shows or YouTube videos, and not something I would recommend for someone who is starting at whatever language, but even less in Japanese. We really like this guy because he's just the proof that we can all have different approaches and still achieve the same kind of results. The reason why I didn't do focused reading at the start with English or Japanese is because objectively, I don't think it's efficient. Even in English, which his reading is kind of straightforward, not really, but you could read something at the start, never had heard it before and still pronounce it correctly. So you could imagine that if you start right now learning Japanese, let's say that you study some grammar and study one keywords before doing immersion and you want to start with reading, do you really think that you're going to read faster than a person is talking? Especially in Japanese, probably not, right? You literally don't know the meanings and readings of 70 to 80% of kanji, so there's no way that you're going to be reading faster than a person is talking. And that's probably why you should be doing listening with subtitles at the start. With that said, once you're capable of reading faster than a person talks, or literally talking yourself while you read, that's probably the most efficient way of learning a language objectively, but also the most difficult one for the reason that it's way boring than watching a show or playing video games, taking in count that we are using books as the method of reading. The most progress I noticed in my English was when I was reading, looking up words and also reading aloud. And then something better than just pure reading was putting pressure on myself and creating this channel. For my English, I never did learn any grammar, never did any self-studying, not really paying attention to grammar during my immersion, and honestly, I acquired it through just pure immersion. Now, how did I really acquire a basis of English? Because to make the input comprehensible, you need to first have a basis on the language you are studying, literally translating everything to Spanish when playing RuneScape, and that was how I acquired a basis in English. It's better crazy to think about it now because I actually never did use Anki as well. So yeah, unless you are aiming to be a teacher or something of the like, you can learn languages without really studying any grammar. I think that almost all of us know that at this point. But if you didn't, then good, because you have learned something new. However, this seems pretty cool for lazy people, which at the moment I was pretty lazy, and doing this method got me started in at least doing something productive with my life. Although I don't preach anymore using the lazy way of learning a language, because I think that if I studied English as much as I'm studying Japanese right now, I will pretty much be a native in the aspects of speaking, reading, and having a massive amount of vocabulary besides not really wanting to change my accent and sound like an American. For languages that don't have a straightforward reading system like Chinese or Japanese, I don't recommend in any way not studying grammar at the start. It is just the most efficient way of acquiring a basis and just start into the immersion as quick as possible. I will even recommend that when you are learning grammar in the language of your preference, you also learn vocabulary along the way. So when you start doing immersion, you have a pretty good basis, and so you will not get demotivated for not understanding anything. Also, because just memorizing vocabulary will not help you learn it. If you can see how it is used through learning grammar, that will help you a lot as well, getting the grasp of the piece of grammar. For how much I think should you be studying grammar and acquiring vocabulary? I think that a good amount before you start doing immersion is 2 months. However, at the end of the first month, you're gonna start doing some immersion to help you acquire vocabulary and grammar faster. And after the second month, you're gonna stop focusing on studying grammar, not vocabulary, honestly, because stopping to study vocabulary is not worth it for at least the first year or even the 2 years of the language you are studying. Another point with grammar is that if you find yourself struggling to learn how they function, eventually through just pure immersion, you will end up acquiring it, which is the thing that happened to me in Japanese. There was some pieces of grammar I didn't really understand during my focus studying, so eventually, after doing a massive approach to immersion, after 2 to 3 months, I ended up acquiring most of the important grammar. So don't really focus on it too much if you lack the skill of concentration. I will link the resources I use for starting to learn Japanese in the description. There's nothing for English because literally I just use Netflix. If you study Japanese, you probably know this guy called Matt vs Japan. Basically, he was one of the most prominent YouTubers learning Japanese, but sadly he stopped uploading videos due to shady things which I don't really know the details of. However, like 1 year after his last upload, he appeared on a podcast and said a way of thinking about speaking, which I really thought was interesting. He says that your vocabulary when speaking is based on the amount of input you have done, but 10 times less than it. Basically, your vocabulary when outputting equals 10 times less the amount of input you have done. And I think that this is actually kind of accurate. You know that even in your native language, you use a default set of words for your everyday life which is actually kind of basic, but in reality you could start reading a book right now with really difficult grammar and vocabulary, and you will understand more than 95% of it. So this is just a theory, but what this could mean is that in order for us to acquire some vocabulary we want to use, we will need to do a lot of input in that area we're trying to get the vocabulary from. So if we want to acquire anatomy vocabulary, we will need to start watching a pretty good amount of medicine content, and eventually you will end up learning and using words about anatomy, which makes more sense than just watching a list of vocabulary that you need to memorize to study medicine and trying to put it in your brain through just memorization in Anki. Really short point related more to the discipline aspect, and it is that waking up super early helped me to literally never procrastinate. I'm not talking about waking up at 5 or at 6, I'm literally talking about waking up at 3 am and starting to study Anki while you're kind of sleepy, just having taken a pee and brush your teeth. When you do this, you start treating those 2 to 3 hours before your parents wake up like some sacred hours, and you will not be scrolling on TikTok or doing purposeless work, because you actually woke up with just one thought in mind, which was learning a language. If you take this advice seriously and apply it, you will notice that going to bed early is not that difficult. Actually, waking up is the thing that you will struggle with for a long time, so aim to always do this progressively. If you really can't wake up before 6 am, tomorrow try and wake up at 5:50 or 5:40. I think that almost all human beings can make that effort. Also, don't feel bad if you wake up late one day, because even I, who I have almost 7 months of waking up at this hour, keep struggling with waking up sometimes. So you really don't need to go super hard on this as long as you don't stop. The key point here is to make your brain go like crazy when you hear the alarm and make your body just automatically move. If you can manage that, you're waking up early at least 5 to 6 out of 7 days of the week. You can have a lot of distractions which are pretty annoying when it comes to the immersion, especially in Japanese. You need to be really aware of the fucking fan service in anime and manga if you are doing immersion with those materials. And I say this because when you do immersion for like 8 to 10 hours, believe me, you start thinking that what you are seeing in your computer is reality. And you probably don't realize that this is happening, but when you're watching a 2D character and your fucking PB wakes up, that's the signal that you're confusing a 2D character with reality, and maybe you should take a break if you don't want to end up developing some weird addiction, especially to porn in anime, which I'm talking from experience, and getting rid of that addiction is not fun, brother, like, believe me. Another strategy you could have is trying to figure out the most efficient method. There's nothing like that. Just find some immersion content, look up and mind words to put in Anki, do immersion for like 4 to 5 hours a day. It doesn't matter if you have a 30% comprehension, and eventually in 5 months you'll be understanding anime and 80% of other type of content. I have yet to see someone doing this, but I can imagine that there's someone right now watching this video not doing immersion because he does not find the perfect immersion content to fit a 95% of comprehension, and in that way learn vocabulary faster. In all honesty, if those are your thoughts, you are just procrastinating and you will burn out in a matter of months. A tip I found that helped me the most was not to bullshit myself. You know, the only bad habits that I usually end up keeping all my life is just because I make myself think that I'm being productive. So the next time that you think you're being productive in doing something else that is not immersion, just don't say that watching this ecchi anime or hentai anime will help your Japanese and give you a testosterone boost. And if you do it, say at least that you're being a loser, so whenever you do it, you get the identity of being a monkey flapper, which will make you feel bad about it and make you do it less, probably. And last but not least, probably the most important point when it comes to motivation, and it is that learning a language does not have to take 3 to 4 years, especially for languages that are well spoken like French, Italian, German, Japanese, English, because at this point there's just so much resources in terms of immersion, courses, apps, books, and so you can literally brute force your way through the language by just studying like 8 hours daily. Depending which language it is, you can actually learn it in 1 or 2 years, and if you do even more hours, I wouldn't really be surprised by you learning that language in less than 1 year. I always remember this guy that learned French fluently in literally 4 months. His name is Adriasola Pastor and he's from Spain. At the moment he lived in France, and probably he had up to plus 12 hours of constant input daily with the speaking practice since the start. And you know that he's not bullshitting, because he did all of this to be able to join a speech competition in Paris, and without being a native he still ended up in like 3rd place or 4th place. So it's pretty crazy, honestly. If you made it till this far of the video, I'm ultra grateful for it, and you clearly have some interest in my content. So if you want more friends who learn languages and are disciplined, consider subscribing and leaving a like to this video. Thank you very much.